So today we will be looking at how to solve and graph linear inequalities. Now the process to solve these inequalities is very simple. You basically solve it like in a normal equation. It's your typical equation. The only thing is that you must flip the inequality sign if you multiply or divide by a negative number. Now let me show you what that means and why we do that. And hopefully this will make sense and allow you to never forget to do that. So let's say we have this statement, 2 is less than 3. And we know that is true because if we look at this number line, 2 comes before 3. 2 is less than 3. This is what this statement is saying. But now if we were to multiply both sides by a negative number, so in this case -1, and again multiplying or dividing by -1 would give us the same result, which would be -2 and -3. But if we kept that inequality the same way, that same sign, this would not be a true statement. As you can see here, -2 is less than -3. Well, if we look at this number line, we see that -2 is to the right of -3. So it's actually greater than -3. So this statement is not true. And that's where we must flip the inequality to make it a true statement. Now, -2 is greater than -3, which is what this is saying. So hopefully this helps. And now we'll go ahead and look at some problems. So the first problem we will look at is this one. 4x plus 8 is less than 12. Now if you remember, we solved this like a normal equation. And then if at any point we multiply or divide by a negative number, we flip that inequality sign. And once we get to graphing, we will go over this. But for now, this is all we have to do. So let's go ahead and solve this. We have 4x plus 8. We want to get x by itself, and this 8 is in the way. So we use our inverse operations to subtract 8 from both sides. And that'll give us 4x on the left side because 8 minus 8 is 0. The inequality stays the same because we did not multiply or divide by a negative number. So that stays the same, and 12 minus 8 is 4. Now to get that x by itself, we divide both sides by 4, which will give us x. And then 1 on the right side. 4 divided by 4 is 1. 4 divided by 4 is 1. But 1x is just the same as x. But now, if we remember, again, I'll bring this back. We only flip the inequality if we multiply or divide by a negative number. In this case, we did divide, but it was by a +4, not a -4. Therefore, the inequality sign stays the same. And this is our solution. X is less than 1. Now to graph this, I'll bring this back. And if you notice at the bottom, there are 3 steps. The first step is we want to find the number. Then we will decide on a circle and then figure out the direction. If this doesn't make sense, you'll see in a moment. So I'm going to move this out of the way. Just move that out of the way. We already solved this, so we know it'll come down to x is less than 1. So the first thing we want to do is we want to figure out the number. And the number in this case, if you notice, we have x by itself and then 1. This is the number we're talking about. So we'll locate 1 on the number line, which is right here. And now we need to decide which kind of circle we will use. If we use a less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, we have a closed circle because that number is included. That number is a part of the solution. However, when it's just less than or greater than, we use an open circle because that number is not included. So in this case, we have a less than symbol, not less than or equal to. So we know we must use an open circle at 1. So I will go ahead and put an open circle at 1. So we already did the first 2 steps. That was the hardest part. Now the direction, we have to ask ourselves, okay, this is saying x has to be less than 1. And if we know from the number line, everything that is less than a number will be to the left of that number. As we go to the left, the numbers go down. As we go to the right, the numbers go up. So once we figure that out, we can simply draw our arrow in that direction. And this says x, the solutions for x is everything less than 1, everything to the left. One little trick I'd like to point out is if you have the variable, in this case x, on the left side of your inequality, of your solution, then this inequality sign will match this arrow. So as you can see, this shape matches this shape. In contrast, if it was going the other direction, if it was something like this, that shape matches that shape, which is pointing that way. The next problem we will look at is this one. Negative 3x minus 4 is greater than or equal to 8. Again, we solve this like a normal equation. And then if we encounter at any point a multiplication or division by a negative number while we are solving, we will flip that inequality sign. So let's go ahead and solve this like a normal equation. Negative 3x, we're trying to get this x by itself, but this negative 4 is in the way. So we use our inverse operations to add 4 to both sides. Now we would have negative 3x all by itself. We keep that inequality the same because we did not multiply or divide by a negative number. And then 8 plus 4 is 12. Now to continue, we want to get rid of this negative 3 that's attached to the x. And so negative 3x is negative 3 times x. So we can divide that negative 3 off, use our inverse operations. Do this to both sides. And now we can see we did multiply or divide, in this case division, by a negative number. So that'll affect our end result. Negative 3 divided by negative 3, that's just 1x or x. We have negative 4 on the right side. And as I mentioned, we must flip this inequality. So now it'll look like that. Before it was pointing that way, now it's pointing this way. Now we flipped. This is the mirror of that. And that was because we divided by a negative number at this step. Great, so this is our solution. X is less than or equal to negative 4. Now we'll look at how to graph this solution. I'll go ahead and move this out of the way. This is not important to graphing. And we want to graph this x is less than or equal to negative 4. And this represents the solutions for x for this initial equation. So if you remember, we first locate this number, our starting point. In this case, it is negative 4. So negative 4 is right there. Now, as I mentioned, when it is less than or equal to or greater than or equal to, we use a closed circle because that number is included. So in this case, we did use one of these symbols. So it's a closed circle, filled in circle at -4. And then now the direction, well, x is less than or equal to -4, so it's everything smaller than -4, which is to the left. So our arrow will go that way. And again, if you notice, this symbol matches this arrow. It's the same way. A neat little trick. And that again only works if the variable is on the left side. Now for this example, we will be starting from the graph and coming up with the solution. If you notice in the previous examples, we got the solution. We got x is less than 4, for example. And then we graph that. Now we're going the other way. We are given the graph and we need to come up with that solution set that describes the graph, that x whatever. So in fact, we will be doing the steps in reverse. We'll be starting with 3, then going to 2, and then finally going to 1. So before anything, we know we are dealing with an x. X represents the solutions to our graph. And then now we can ask ourselves, which direction is the arrow pointing? In this case, it's pointing to the right. And as we go to the right, the numbers increase. 3 is bigger than 2, 4 is bigger than 3, 5 is bigger than 4. So we know x has to be greater than something. If you remember that little trick, if the x is on the left side, this inequality matches the direction of the arrow. Now we go on to step number 2. We were just at step number 3. We go to step number 2. And we decide, is there a line underneath this inequality symbol? If you remember, open circles mean there is no line. It's just less than or greater than. In this case, we have an open circle, so we do not put anything. We leave it as is. And finally, we go to our last step, which was our first step in the previous example. And we decide what number we are going off of. In this case, the circle is right above 1, so we can simply put 1. And now we can check our work. We can do these steps. We have our number, 1. We do an open circle because this has no line underneath it. It's not equal to. And then the direction. X is greater than 1, so everything to the right of 1 is bigger than 1. So we draw it that way, and we know we have the correct answer. Here we have another example where we have the graph on the number line, and then we're trying to find the solution to represent that algebraically. So as always, we put that x first. X is just going to represent the solution set, and then we work backwards. We have x. The arrow's pointing to the left, so it's everything that's smaller. So that means that x is going to be less than. Now we go to step number 2, and we see that this is a closed circle, so we must add that or equal to line underneath it, because 0 is included. And then finally, we write down that number, which in this case, it's 0, and we can check. X has to be less than or equal to 0. So 0 is included because it has a closed circle, and x is everything less than. And again, this inequality here matches the direction of the arrow over here. So to recap, to solve inequalities, you solve it just like any other equation. But the only difference is that you must flip the inequality sign if you multiply or divide by a negative number. That's the only difference. For graphing inequalities, you take these 3 steps. You locate the number in the inequality. So in this case, for x is less than or equal to 1, that 1 would be your number. You would go to that point on the number line and then decide if you use an open or closed circle. And if it has a line underneath it, if it's or equal to, it's closed because it includes. And if it doesn't, it's an open because it does not include. So you would draw this circle at this number. And then finally, you would identify the direction. So is x less than this number? So is it to the left? Or is x greater than this number? Is it to the right? And you can always use that little trick that we did where the inequality sign matches the direction of the arrow. Now, the last thing is if you're given the graph first, and then you're trying to find the solution for that. So in this case, if you're given the graph, you're trying to find this right here, this x is less than 1. You would just write down an x and do these backwards. So you would write down an x, and then based off of the direction, you would write your inequality symbol. And then you'd then decide if you put the line underneath based off of the circle. And then on the other side, you would put the number. I hope this helps.